Hello, I'm here with Ian, and we're going to talk about the first chapter of the book Zombies and Western Culture, 21st Century Crisis by John Vervaeke, Christopher Mastro Pietro, and Philippe Misevich. And we'll provide a link in the show notes. And I'll just read like a little introduction, and then we'll kind of go through it and talk about it.
Sounds good.
So, this is a summary of the book's first chapter, which outlines some of the author's arguments about zombies in Western culture and how they will treat the subject in the rest of the book. So, chapter one is called A New Zeitgeist, and it starts with a chart that shows a huge rise from about 1930 to about 2010 of the prevalence of the word zombie in English language books. It then outlines how zombies morphed in movies. In the film White Zombie from 1932, a man uses a witch doctor to get a woman who he's in love with to love him back, but he instead turns her into a blank staring automaton, and he's horrified. It's interesting that this early zombie rendition was beautiful rather than decrepit. So, moving from the 20th to the 21st century, zombies became part of the zeitgeist, with about half the movies made about them in the last few decades, and even zombie walks, where groups of people play act being zombies in city streets occurring worldwide. Zombies have also come from being objects of horror to appearing in movies and shows of various genres, including comedy, and they may be, quote, the only modern myth, according to Deleuze and Guattari. So, what's the meaning of the zombie, and why have they become so prevalent in our imagination? Most scholars think that they are a reflection of humanity to itself, and despite the variety of it as entertainment, its features persevere. Quote, consumerism, poverty, hunger, political dystopia, and environmental degradation. Zombies are a metaphor for our crisis in meaning. End quote. The appearance of zombies emerged with the West's meaning crisis, a crisis of worldview that Vervaeke has lectured about elsewhere, which we can kind of summarize by the loss of the sacred canopy of Christianity and an increasing alienation from our surroundings. The replacement of extraterrestrials as the primary monster may signal a weariness and alienation from the Cold War and the threat of nuclear annihilation. In sum, zombies seem to represent something about us, about our loss of meaning, and they are a complex symbol. Interestingly, they are an inarticulate form of representation, and the authors attempt to articulate what zombies might actually mean. So that's my little rough summary of the first chapter of that book.
Nice, nice, accurate. I like it. Yeah. What did you think of the first chapter? Like any general thoughts on it before we dive into the specifics?
I had general thoughts. I guess I mean, they're scholars, so they're trying to kind of rigorously argue, kind of convincingly about their particular take on zombies, which is different from other scholars' take on it. And they kind of want to make this very specific argument. I guess for me, I'm not ready to rigorously kind of discuss that part, but I'm still just kind of trying to process the aesthetic of the zombie, what it may mean. And I guess my general idea is that it's they're very int so they're prevalent in our society to where even people will play act being them in groups sometimes. And it's just an interesting thing to discuss in terms of what they may represent about a meaning crisis, people feeling like not alive, not connected, feeling like the world is not good, kind of general things like that. So that's kind of instead of their specific argument, I'm kind of, at least for right now, interested in the general kind of idea and playing with this idea. But I know this book was on your list for a while, your to read list. Like, what interested you here, or what general ideas, thoughts do you have about this first chapter?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'll agree with you that the sort of the main goal of the authors here seems to be to sort of summarize the arguments they're going to be making later. So I agree, getting into the arguments that they'll be making later, let's save those for the episodes where we actually read those particular sections. But I liked I was pretty drawn into this first section because of the examples that they pull up,
Mm,
the sort of veins that they mine to pull out these images and these stories and these sort of memes or whatever. I don't know if that's quite the proper use of the term meme, but close
mm,
enough. General idea,
mm,
and I found each of them to be really rich. So. In regards to the podcast, I'm definitely interested in diving into some of those. But to kind of answer your question as to my interest in the book in general, um, well, there was a quote by Jordan Peterson that I'm just remembering, um, that I wanted to look up and I did not look up. I think it was, and so I'm paraphrasing because clearly I didn't look it up, but it was something like the zombie is a symbol for the choice of mindlessness or ignorance or sleep, that general I as a response to the modern crises that were the meaning crisis or the poly crisis or the social and ecological falling apart of everything crisis that we're dealing with. The choosing ignorance as a means of dealing with it. Like, I'm just not gonna just gonna la la la, just kind of gonna go along.
mm,
um, that struck me, um, when I think I heard that in a talk he was giving. Jordan Peterson's a mixed bag for me, but sometimes he knocks one out of the park, and that was one. I think that may have been from an earlier lecture in any case, but
mm,
um, that really struck home. And then obviously I'm a fan of Vervaeke as well. I think we've talked about him in the past too. And when I heard he'd written a book on it, I was like, oh, meaning crisis, ignorance, ignoring. This will be great. So I had just wanted to look into sort of his take on, somebody who has such a nuanced grasp of the struggle that we're going through as a society right now. His take on the zombie as a phenomena, as a myth. I did not know the Deleuze and Guattari quote. I still need to dig that deep into the postmodern analysis of society. But regardless, I think it is a myth, and I think
mm,
we don't have a lot of myths these days.
mm,
Um, so that's sort of my initial draw to it. But I did also want to start out with, the word itself is, I think, pretty fascinating, and says kind of maybe more than it intends to, right? So I looked it up. Zombie comes from, I think most people know, it's a voodoo thing, right? It's the spooky voodoo priest sprinkles the dust on either the corpse or the person, and then the person turns into a corpse or the corpse walks again. It's only later that we get the whole idea of it being a plague, that you can catch it. It used to just be like, oh, somebody put a voodoo spell on you and now you're a zombie. It's up there with the dolls with the pins in it and stuff like that.
mm.
But the thing about voodoo is, it's if you take it as a serious phenomena, it's the Haitian version.
Sorry.
All good, man. I'm sure you can stitch all that. Um, so So the word zombie comes from, I think it's like through the French, but it basically traces back to Haiti and the enslaved African folks trying to maintain some form of their initial culture and religion
Mm,
through the Middle Passage into slavery, and into sort of forced Christianity.
Mm,
I assume that's what was happening. That seems pretty common. I don't have the details. I don't have the history knowledge of that, but it seems like a pretty good guess.
mm,
So already you have humans who have been made into objects. That's what chattel slavery is like they're no longer humans. They're objects that I own and I make work for me.
mm,
And the curse of the voodoo priest is that he's going to turn you into an object and make you do what he wants. So you're
mm,
under control of the voodoo priest. So there's this weird, to me, this weird mirroring of like the fear of the enslaver, that the property is going to actually be a person and rise up and have opinions and not be treated as an object anymore
mm,
and fight back. And the zombie as sort of like the dark reversal of that, where it's like, well, I guess it is, because with the zombie, you're seeing something that is dead, that is an object, lacking life, lacking meaning,
mm,
but is going through the world as if it were alive
mm,
and attacking you. So it's like you don't often have a lot of um, often the metaphors like they do here is capitalism, consumerism, and all of
mm.
that. But I think there's the fact that the word comes from Haiti, and Haiti was, I think, the original like slave uprising. The Haitian slaves rose up against the French, and I think they managed to overthrow them and take over
I
Haiti, and
think
it
they
was
did.
like
Yeah.
it was their own. They managed to claim their own thing. So the fact that it's Haitian that the word zombie comes from, where there was the objectified humans became attackers, these things that were supposed to be under control. So there's this like underlying current of slavery and the effects of slavery that treating human beings as objects has on the subconscious of the enslaving people, that I think is, I don't think the book touches on that, but the etymology of the word, and I think it goes back to, if the internet is to be trusted, it goes back to West Africa. I didn't catch the particular culture, but Nzombi, something like that, probably butchering it, but the internet says it means, ghost or spirit. So something that is dead, something that no longer exists,
Mm,
um, uh, as a physical entity. And now we're becoming, it's turned into a physical entity that has no life. So like instead of the spirit being removed from the body, it's the body's removed from the spirit and the body carries on.
mm.
Um, so just wanted to kind of speak to that as the source of the word and the source of the idea. Um, and the fascination I have with how that ties into Haiti in particular, and the sort of above ground historical role that Haiti plays, as well as this sort of underground subconscious cultural mythological realm that has sort of risen up, as they say, in the 30s. And the be interesting. I should have looked up when the Haitian Revolution was. I mean, it was prior to the 30s. It was probably the 18 somethings,
Yeah,
but
I think so.
it would be I'd be interested in, or maybe the 17, maybe it had something to do around the time of it probably would have been post French Revolution, because you already got people rising up for their rights there,
Mm,
post American Revolution. So any case, I could speculate, but I don't want to look it up right now in the
yeah.
middle of the podcast. It's dead air. It's no good for content. So yeah, that was just kind of my first thought, that and sort of why I'm interested in the zombie in general. It's akin to how in some of the classic 80s, I think Amityville horror, classic 80s movies, horror movies, the haunted house is built on an Indian burial ground. It's
Mm,
like the deaths of the Native Americans, the sort of loss of their culture, but the way that they are still a part of the land, you know. A lot of our horror, I think, is a way of expressing something that we can't quite bring ourselves to be conscious of as a culture, but we still want to um, deal with those psychic contents in some way or another.
mm.
Um, and And that brings us right to the start of the chapter where we have the zombie walks, the zombie parades, everybody kind of getting together and dressing up like zombies and going out on the streets and sort of it feels like a ritual. It feels like a play and
Mm,
making physical of something that is subconscious and psychical,
mm,
psychological. Um, so I don't know. I think that's a good place to kind of dive
mm.
in next if you got any thoughts on that or on anything else I've been rambling about.
Well, yeah, I do like the etymology. It is interesting that, yeah, it came from a culture that did revolt successfully against slavery. And zombie does seem in a way like the witch doctor kind of has uses magic. It's a form of power that is different from sort of physical power. It has something to do with belief, with uh, yeah, but yeah, it's some kind of power.
Mhm.
As you were speaking about that, it was reminding me of the idea of the Hebrew Golem, another
Mm.
kind of oppressed group amidst, a larger group, and it's similar in that it had I just read it in the book The Chosen or something. I didn't research this or anything, but from that work of fiction, it just seems like it's something where a rabbi or something, some kind of spiritual, leader would take some inanimate thing and animate it. Of course, I guess that's the opposite in a way of a zombie. But
Oh,
anyway, it,
yeah.
it
Oh.
seems this sort of animate, living, dead thing. So and all of that carries through to our current sort of usage, right? It's this thing, it's this body that is animate, that is moving, but is dead in some way. And you mentioned something I think is interesting that people will enact this thing. I mean, maybe later we could kind of look this up from like people who did it, why they say they did it.
Mm.
But that is interesting that they're kind of play acting, being that thing, being a walking dead. And I don't know what that means exactly, but it seems like it has something to do, sort of makes me think of like depression,
Mm.
where you're going through life, but you don't have much pleasure, or things sort of seem black and white. And yeah, you're moving, but you don't feel like the spirit of life. You don't feel alive. You don't feel very connected. You don't feel a sense of meaning and purpose. But I don't know. What do you think of those zombie walks?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the just to kind of touch on that last thing you were talking about before I get to the zombie walks, because I think that I don't know, that spoke to me that like the depression, the lack of meaning and purpose. Clearly that's where Vervaeke's going, at least as far as the meaning crisis is. So I'm sure we'll be able to unpack this more later.
Mm,
But yeah, that's really like the feeling of being both alive and dead at the same time. The
mm,
feeling of like, well, I'm here, I'm not, I can move, but something in me doesn't feel alive. Implies there's some knowledge somewhere in the unconscious of what feeling alive would actually be. To have
mm,
a lack, you have to have a reference of what you're lacking.
mm,
Um, and I guess that would be my thoughts about the zombie walk in that um the same way that you'll have people sort of say truths that are difficult, but then turn them into a joke. There's a lot of truth and humor.
mm,
Um, I imagine people are going on zombie walks for fun. I don't think anybody's going out there to make a social statement and be very like conceptual and forceful about it. I imagine it's just like, oh, it's the same Santa, people will dress up like Santa and go pub crawling and around Christmas time, and it's just a fun thing to do. But I think the reason it carries enough meaning that people are, there's these mass numbers of people going out and doing it as they lay out in the book, is there's this sense of like I am able to represent something through my actions to myself and to other people that feels true about me, or that on some level, like, or I recognize is true about other people, or there's this unspoken truth in and amongst the culture that we're
Mm,
all sort of just mindlessly consuming things. There's this lack of meaning. And if we can't talk about it, because to talk about it is to make it real, is to then we have to face it. And then we're not zombies, then we're terrified. Then we're being attacked by the. But if there's some sort of social law or social more of like, oh, don't talk about it, then it gets repressed. And if it's repressed, but it still wants to be expressed in some way, this is a way to do that. It's a way to sort of embody it, enact it, make it visible in the culture, in a way that at least the idea and the experience and the feeling of it is is brought out of the unconscious enough that it's present. And I would imagine there's some level of like pressure release around doing it, of just like, oh, this is, and again on kind of an unconscious level, but of like of um enacting that sort of enacting that myth of like, oh, here's the story of something that's true about us, that captures, it's a symbol that captures more things than a lecture will capture. An
hmm
image is worth 1,000 words. A play is worth more than 1,000 words.
mm,
An enactment of something is a moving image. So every move is like another 1,000 words, I guess, if you want to
mm.
take that literally. But you can say a lot through movement and through play acting than you can through uh, just talking into a camera. Um, and I think there's some element to that in there. Just that it holds the image up to the society.
Yeah, yeah. I like this idea that it is a kind of serious play. I mean, and what it's showing, it seems, or what it's expressing, what it's participating in does seem to be yeah. I mean, this seems obvious, but it's like a kind of deadness. And maybe I'm just thinking about living in like a really big city or something, and you at busy times, you pass by a lot of people and they might seem kind of a little deadish to you, and you might feel kind of alienated. Something about all that. And I maybe to fill out the image a little more, there's a lot more people than on the street walking. There's a lot of people in cars, and you can't really wander around. You need to like not cross the street at certain points and certain times. But yeah, maybe there's a certain, because of that, a certain deadness that you can feel. And then maybe, yeah, maybe you're just not that connected to people you live around, family, your job, and things like that. All of that stuff, the sort of stuff that like Fight Club, the movie, was talking about at the beginning, and that's why he sort of wants to go into the Fight Club, and that's why his mind invents the Tyler Durden. And they want to destroy society because they're looking for sense of aliveness and purpose. So it
Yeah,
does
it's
seem to be expressing something like that. And you were talking about how instead of talking about it, um, I thought that, yeah, it's some things are better for talking, but some things are better for sort of action. And I'm really into this idea of playing, serious play. I've never done it myself, but it seems right in for some things to express things with your body with other people instead of trying to articulate them always with speech, or maybe later you can articulate it or something like that. But um yeah, it seems maybe healthy in some way, although might I might also talk about my other ideas that it's some in some way it might be imitation, it might be something else, but yeah, but I do think it seems it just seems yeah, it seems like an expression of deadness, I guess.
Hmm.
That's not too
Hmm.
obvious, but
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the Fight Club comparison is spot on, and I hadn't really even considered that, but um, I don't know how many people know, but the author Chuck Palahniuk was he wrote it as a critique. Like it wasn't supposed to inspire people. It was supposed to be like kind of terrifying.
mm,
Instead of like having people go up to him and be like, "Hey, I started my own fight club. It's great. I found some meaning in my life." He's like, "Oh, that's not." I was criticizing if I understand it correctly, the critique is like masculinity is so deprived of meaning that they have to turn to violence in the
mm,
story. And I mean that's sort of I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but just within the confines of this dialogue, I think that'll do.
mm,
But when you brought it up in regards to the zombie conversation that we're having, I was thinking like, oh, like Fight Club is a story told by the point of view from the point of view of somebody who becomes a zombie and and starts turning other people into zombies. If you take off the romanticization of violence that a lot of people inject into that story, I think the original intent is one of, like you said, like they become violent and they become destructive and they become active in the world. And it spreads and it grows everywhere. And and yeah, it's very interesting. Because like I don't know, when Fight Club came out, I was one of those people who was like, "Oh, that sounds great. Like I want that. I don't want to necessarily get punched in the face a bunch, but that idea of finding a way to come back to my body, of coming back alive,
yeah.
um, was appealing, right? But yeah, what does that say about the zombies? What does that? I mean, I think they reference in here at some point 28 days later, which is
Mm,
if you one of my favorite movies. I love it.
me
It's
too.
written by Alex Garland. Anything he does, I'm a huge
Good.
fan of his work. But the angry zombies, the feral, the rageful zombies,
Mm,
the fast zombies that he comes up with, that seems very like Fight Club from the outside. Like imagine you hear about these people who are beating each other up all the time and then blowing up buildings and everything else that they're doing in Fight Club. Like if they're not the heroes of the story and you hear about it happening, third hand out in the world, that would be terrifying. What the
mm,
fuck is going on? These guys are terrorists. What's happening? They're just blowing
mm,
up all these structures um and you kind of can't control them and they're wild and they're tearing things apart and um yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know. I'm sort of spinning out here on the Fight Club zombie comparison. I think that's really rich and unexpected territory. So I've kind of lost the thread that we were on apart from that. Um,
mm. Well, yeah, but yeah, it seems like an interesting comparison. And I thought, I mean, I think there's something about the Fight Club idea where, I mean, men do need to have some relationship to violence. You said that when it originally came out, you felt like it's has something to do with being in touch with your body. And I read the book, but I'm thinking of the images of the movie and like not being like he had tried to sort of be the perfect consumer. I mean, not he had set out to be that way, but he's just trying to do what you're supposed to do in life.
mhm,
And he had like an IKEA kind of whole setup in his apartment and basically he had everything he needed materially, but he felt empty. So that's why he started joining those groups of like cancer patients, and he started to cry with them, and so he felt kind of connected or seen, or something like that. But then that got disrupted, and then so he started to do the fight clubs. And I think there's something to that where you want to, as a man especially, you want to feel competent. You want to have some relationship to violence, and that has something to do with like something we've maybe repressed in the modern world, and it's good to have some kind of outlet. I always think it's interesting that like one of the most Buddhist countries in the world, Thailand, has the most deadly martial art practically too, Muay Thai, and it's like this whole national thing. It's not like a very tiny niche thing that they have, and of course they have ritual around it and everything. They're not violent with each other, I think, in public very much, and but yeah, I think there's something about the violence part that's kind of healthy. But yeah, I was I it kind of progresses, I think, partially. My view is just because they're like a bunch of boys. They're like a gang, like a street gang of like teenagers, and they never have any purpose beyond that. Like contrasting it with Muay Thai, it's contained. It's like, okay, we have an animal kind of side, animal energy, and we want to get that out, but you can contain it within the larger culture and a larger philosophy of compassion and ritual, and you know that's not your whole part. That's part of you. It's
Mhm.
a, relative important but relatively minor part of you. And then, but in Fight Club, they don't have that. They don't have a philosophy besides a sort of. It's a little like hedonism or narcissistic or something. And they, like you're saying, they need to expand out and uh, destroy society. They want to. In the book, he talks about how they sort of mythologize, or they look back to this ideal primitive time where indigenous people would sacrifice on a hill or something like that, and the the human sacrifices, like uh bodies would be somehow run down the hill or something like that, and that's where the soap comes from that gets translated into the movie or something. I can't remember all these details, but it's something like they want to return, which is not just from this book, but it's a strain in our culture of, in a way, hating society and wanting to rebel against it, to destroy it in some way, or to live apart from it or something. It's this idea that society is kind of pressing down on us, and that's inhibiting our natural sort of feeling of aliveness and happiness, which of course there is something to that. um
Mhm. Mhm.
but anyway, that's kind of my idea of that book, it and the movie. It's interesting that you're talking about there is a parallel in a way to what zombies do, of this mindless violence and spreading. There is kind of that parallel. I wonder, I'm trying to kind of comprehend that. I have a tendency to just sometimes just think it's like a lot of different kinds of ideas that are just in the air, and people with talent, artistic talent and opportunity sometimes put them together, and that's kind of like a vehicle for the whole thing. So sometimes it could be something like that. Now it does have a meaning, but sometimes I'm a little, with my philosophical leanings, I'm a little hesitant to go right into that, how much that might mean about humans, because sometimes I think the meaning that we sort of think exists, we're like sort of almost programming ourselves with that, and it's not necessary. I sort of
Mm.
always go back to like, what is the best philosophical sort of way of thinking? It's sort of something to do with nature, something to do with basic things, with simple things. And So yeah, so I'm always that dialogue kind of goes back and forth in my head of not being overly complicated with artificial kinds of ideas that people put together. But
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Yeah, I just see that being like iterations and iterations, or at least this is the pattern I'm
yeah.
picking up in what you're saying of like starting with the zombie idea. And one of the things they touch on in here, and they do reference that there's more facets to it, but one of the facets is consumerism. And that ties right into what you're talking about as the beginning of Fight Club, where he's like gotta have the perfect IKEA couch and the chair and the clothes and everything, the cornflower blue icon on the desktop, everything needing to be aligned just perfectly. And the idea that out of that will come meaning, out of the consumption of the proper things will come meaning. Um, I hear you saying that as well with the philosophy of like, oh, does this, if we take in too many of these ideas, if we say this means something about humanity, like can we simplify it back down?
Hmm.
There's also some level of like consumption there of being careful what we take in,
Hmm.
um, and
Yeah.
and 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 taking as real things that maybe aren't real,
Yeah.
you know, and that when it let me try and trace that thread again. Um, with the zombies, where it's consumption based, like in Fight Club, he starts out like that, and then he realizes that that's not going to work. Um, and if we stick with just the zombie as consumer metaphor, um, this idea that we're just here to eat, whether that's brains, flesh, or Netflix, and um, I don't know, the Kardashians, whatever
Yeah. Yeah.
cultural stuff that we're fed, the right fashion, or talk about their go to the right, music concert, extravaganza things, whatever it is, the consumption of culture is another kind of consumption, and in all of those, like there's this objectifying of things, right? Even down to, if you look at the people doing the marketing, sort of causing the need for consumers to consume, they're treating people as objects. Oh, if we can just convince these people that if we can make them do the thing we want them to do, which is buy our products, then we'll be rich. How do we make them do that? Not how do we benefit them so that things go well for them. So then they talk about, the sort of word of mouth, because I've made something good and true and beautiful, and it will support itself in the culture and it will uplift the culture. You don't often have that as the main message. It's often like, you need to have this. You need, link it with sex. Oh, the hot lady selling you the burger, or the adventure. Oh, look at this car. It'll take you on an adventure. You need to have this in the car. We'll give you this thing that you need. So all of that is like, it's trying to throw things at you and telling you that you have a lack and you need them. And to the extent that you go along with that program, you become a zombie. You're just consuming whatever it is. Um, I'm sure they'll probably get into that more in the later chapters, but that was sort of my read on that. But what that does is it creates a world where nature, you were saying go back to nature. But before we go back to nature, while we're still in the zombie mode, it creates a thing where nature becomes an object
Hmm.
devoid of meaning, simply to be harvested, produced from, and then consumed.
Hmm.
So sort of processed and consumed. Um, and there you have like the zombies, our own zombie nature, our own consumer nature beginning to turn on the world and devour the world, which I think uh, Vervaeke and crew mentioned domicide, the destruction of the home, and I think I assume they're going to probably get into that somewhere too. But all of this comes back to seeing things that either are alive or could be alive. People are alive, plants are alive. You could argue maybe the planet's alive in a certain way, so don't. mining. I'm thinking you can't really say that a mountain's alive the way you can say a forest is alive, but there's still something there that you can respect. And traditional cultures, traditionally we would have a relationship with all of these things as entities and beings that are alive and that we relate to, and that through those relationships, we derive meaning. And so, the zombie walks as sort of a wink and a nod to each other of, hey, wow, we're just walking around consuming things and there's no meaning to our life. Um, the treating of people like objects, um, and 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 then to bring it back to Fight Club, like once you realize that that doesn't work, you get angry, or at least you start having emotions. So he
Mm,
goes to try and deal with those emotions in like the 12-step programs, because he feels sick. He feels like he's dying, just like the zombies are sort of the walking dead. This is
mm,
just coming to me right now. But he goes to these cancer support groups where everybody literally is dying, and he feels seen because he, on some level, is dying as well, or at least is realizing he's been in this state of living death. He's been a zombie consuming. And then that, like you said, that gets shut down. I forget in the book if it stops working or if he gets, oh, Marla Singer comes out and
yeah,
tells him he's a faker, and then he can't
yeah.
he can't do it anymore. So the sort of dark anima figure comes in and like negates it for him.
Mm.
And then he's forced to deal with the rage, the deadness and the sort of, he's forced to come back into contact with the violence, and then has to destroy the culture because of the empty, meaningless nature of the culture. Um, Sort of necessitates that. So then you have this sort of mindless destruction element. And I think at least the question for me is, if we start to see the end of consumerism, if we start to wake up and realize that we're zombies in this way, how do we respond? Do we turn on the system and tear it down? And what are we left with if we do? Or do we try and build something new that doesn't get sucked into the system that seems to commodify everything? I feel like that's really, at least within this exploration, it's occurring to me that that might be what the zombie's pointing us to. The figure to see ourselves as a zombie is to come face to face with the fact that this is the world that we're stuck in, that we're living and we're sort of ignorant of. And what do we do about that? Like that's kind of the question the zombie presents us with.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I
yeah.
agree with that. Yeah, I think that's the sort of, myths are supposed to be useful, right? They reflect something back to the culture of it needs to pay attention to or it's preoccupied with or something. And yeah, that seems like the usefulness. If a lot of people are afraid or they feel like they're sort of living dead or they feel like others are kind of living dead coming to consume them, they don't feel connected, they don't feel like they have a purpose in life, then yeah, this seems like it presents us with a mirror and then we can kind of try to decide, what kind of life we want to have or what kind of perspective we want to have. We want to feel alive. Um, yeah, and obviously in our culture now we have a lot of people that at least talk like they want to destroy the society or yeah, there's some kind of feeling of violence, feeling of anger. Anger is kind of like it can be protective of yourself, like because you feel beset or you feel not alive or you feel like others are not connecting with you, or there's a lot of reasons for it, right? And also it can be kind of uh, uh, it can just kind of spread. It can be imitative, can be narcissistic. There's all sorts of things, but yeah, it seems now there is a kind of anxiety, anger, a lot of kind of emotions that move you to maybe strong action. And yeah, so you mentioned societal destruction, maybe, or maybe rebuilding, or something. Yeah, and I mentioned the sort of returning to nature. I mean, yeah, you talked about how maybe the sort of sometimes we can kind of commodify things too much. Make we you know we make so much stuff. We kind of have so many objects, so much marketing. Um, where and you mentioned specifically the marketing to make people feel like they have a need for something rather than to advertise something that they might want to be attentive to and to get for an actual need, for like a natural need that they have, that maybe they don't know about this type of food or this product that they actually do, that actually would make their life better and not just have more stuff in it, you know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. 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 The sort of it's like the because like I will say like the line between the two of that you're drawing of like the advertising that's just trying to sell you some bullshit you don't need versus the advertising that's that the products that are actually trying to improve life, like that line runs down the middle of almost everything, it skews one way or the other in a lot of products, but and I'm sure there are some people out there that are, that you get the scams and the cons where they're just trying to convince you to do something just so they can have the money. Um, but that's not to say that like everything is quite so black and white. Um, but to the degree that I think the point becomes, how do I convince you to buy this thing, whether you want to or not, as opposed to how do I find out whether I've made a thing that is a good fit for my people and my society?
mm,
The difference there is whether the person being sold to is a person or an object. If you're just trying to make the person object you press their buttons with the right way and they give you the money, and you don't care about them as a living being, then you'll market them whatever, however you can to make that happen. So you get rich and powerful, and that solves all your problems, and you don't have to deal with people anymore. If you see them as a being, then with their own genuine needs, their own life, their own wishes, their own desire for safety and security that you have in yourself, if you see them that way, then ideally you want to contribute to their well-being in the best way that you can. So it's like the the consumer, the market becomes human or objectified by the marketer. And that's where the initial zombie spell comes in. This the story of the zombie by turning the consumer into an object, the same way that the slaves were turned into an object, um, creates this um, need for revolution because the truth of the situation is these people are alive. They do have meaning. They do have purpose. They do have desires. And those forces that are in them will rise up one way or another, whether it's zombie outbreak, slave rebellion, fight club, whatever it is, these forces will come through at some point. Um, but I think to kind of rein ourselves back into the article under discussion, and this is a nice place to do it. The next section of it, they talk about the white zombie film.
mm,
Um, and the quote they pull, so this guy is in love with this girl, and he, um, let's see, does he do it? The who young man turned voodoo master transforms a young woman into a subordinate, pale-skinned corpse.
mm,
So, I mean, what a kind of on the nose metaphor for objectifying women, you know?
mm,
Um, let's see. The ironic consequence comes to affect change in his intentions, and he repents to her. I thought that beauty alone would satisfy, but the soul is gone. I can't bear these empty, staring eyes.
mm.
Um, And that's like if we map that back onto the consumer marketer metaphor, not, the marketers often don't care if you're staring at them with dead zombie eyes, because as long as you're giving them the money, that's what they're looking for. But that moment of like, I thought that beauty alone would satisfy. I thought that the thing that I could get, that I could consume, I could own, I could have, I thought that would satisfy, but it feels dead.
Hmm.
That's I think, to my mind, that truth is what's behind the popularity of the zombie walks. We're all enacting that and telling that to each other of, look how dead this is. Look how we thought that owning these things would bring us would satisfy us, and they don't.
Hmm.
Um and representing that dissatisfaction and that hunger. Um and here I think you can also think of like hookup culture or
Hmm.
pornography,
Hmm.
anything that objectifies. I mean, it's often always obviously women, but I think it can go both ways, just in the sense of like, if you are looking for just a hookup without any meaning,
Hmm.
those can be very dissatisfying. So I hear,
Hmm.
not married, so not engaged in a lot of that these days. But the sort of the zombification, the commodification of connection as something that you can just sort of force and do, instead of taking the long way around and trying to build and work and find something where the other person is alive instead of just an object to fulfill a need.
Hmm.
Um, we kind of run into that in the dating world, and I think the the white zombie, the way they touch into like the vein of that, the meme of that, is
Hmm.
I think really relevant, both for man woman relating, and then also um, humanity and the earth relating. Like, we thought we could sort of just turn the planet into an object and treat it and get everything we wanted from it. And here
Hmm.
we're doing that, and yet we're so dissatisfied. We're not fed by it.
Hmm.
And your talk earlier of returning to nature would be to make it live again, acknowledge that it is alive, and start that relationship, that true relationship with it.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah, so when you're looking at things with this sort of instrumental rationality to fulfill desires or needs of yourself, I mean, you want to sort of understand the things that you're trying to consume or thinking of consuming, have their own purpose. And maybe that's a way of sort of reanimating the reality around you, and you won't feel so dead anymore because you're surrounded by life. Other people and living things and who knows, plants have consciousness and purpose, and life is all around you. You can make an object of study of things around you, their relations to you. I'm getting some of this from Rousseau. Um,
nice.
but yeah, like it seems like that's some of the answer, I think, is kind of being more interested in the world around you, trying to understand it, not trying to when you're in a consuming mindset, I guess the thing is like there is something like a store and full of stuff, and I have some desires or some needs or passing desires. Things are being made salient to my attention by marketers or, flash. And then I'm sort of like looking to buy stuff, and instead more maybe having a little bit of a distance and starting to understand things in that store for what they are. Maybe this thing can is good for me, and so I'll buy it. But these other things are kind of like passing things, and it's not what I really want. And then I can turn my attention to the other things in life and other people and start to see them more. get
Hmm.
away from maybe the social media and the constant short form videos or something. I'm kind of just making a stereotype or something, but
Consume. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, consuming information and understanding more myself and the world around me.
Hmm. Yeah, I think what I hear you pointing to there, as like a, like if somebody hears that and like, well, that sounds great, but how the fuck do I go about doing it? Like, y y- you're you hmm. There's a call there to de-zombify yourself, to because you have to go inside first. Because if you're only like, well, the TV says I should like these things and I like these things and so I eat them and this is what I want and this is what I do. Like, the step back that you're talking about is is a chance to say, oh, do I want these things? And then the question becomes, what do I want? What do I want? What, not what have I been told I'm supposed to want, but what do I want and how do I know the difference? And I think that's a very deep question, and I don't think there's necessarily a ready answer to it. But if you can sort of carry that question through life, literally, like moment to moment, that might start to resurrect the sense of meaning. Because what's genuinely yours to want makes you feel alive to a certain extent. It may not be always pleasurable. I don't want this to be a hedonistic thing,
Mhm.
but there is a pleasure inherent in a meaningful life
Mm.
that, I mean, to sort of possibly misquote Viktor Frankl, but if you have a why, you can survive anyhow. If you have a meaning, then the pain becomes a lot less important. Like, oh, I'm doing this because it's important, because I know it's important.
Yeah.
That comes from inside. That's what's missing when you're taking on all of the spells that are the zombie spells that are thrown on you. Become a consumer, just eat, do what I say. Like, where is my life? Where do I get to jump up and live again? Um, to misquote Martin Prechtel. Just an acknowledgement there of where I got that particular turn of phrase. But I think equally important is oh, where is it? I don't remember where in the book, but in the chapter, but they mentioned something about it being related to Christianity.
Yeah.
And I mean, what we're talking about here is a resurrection, you
Mm.
know? The thing in me that was dead,
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to I'm trying to bring to life again.
Yeah.
And
That's very interesting.
yeah, I think I'll just kind of stop there. That feels, not that we can keep talking, but like, I tend to ramble, and that, give that some space.
No, that's brilliant. Yeah, I had read that in the chapter here that it's related to Christianity and obviously in general the societal sort of loss of the what they call the sacred canopy of Christianity, all the practices, community, the church being in the center of the village and all that stuff and being the tallest thing in the village and being everybody being oriented towards that and worldview and all that stuff. But yeah, I don't know what the book says about that, but the resurrection, it seems like, yeah, you could say symbolically or image wise, we sort of feel like zombies a little bit. We feel like we are zombies, but we're trying to become resurrected. We're dead, but we are still moving and conscious in some way, but we're trying to become alive again. And yeah, that seems like a good way of thinking about it. When you were mentioning like trying to decide what things to buy or how to interact with the world, that's all the same thing. To me, that seems like a good use of rationality of understanding the nature of things, relation to myself, uh, and all of that. And I was just thinking of, in general, how philosophers in times of crisis, of course, Vervaeke talks a lot about this, Stoics, Socrates, and everything. All those people, Buddha, they they're still with us, but they came about during times of crises in their societies, a sort of spiritual, physical, wartime kind of things. And yeah, I think that's there. uh, Vervaeke talks about how the Stoic Diogenes of Laertius would he seems to have maybe filtered down to us through the tarot card of I don't know what it's called, but it's like a this hooded guy or something with this lamp, and it's
Oh,
it's like the
the
idea of the like looking around kind of, and
yeah,
he would suppose there's this story about him going into the marketplace and being and sort of looking around very intently, and then people ask, wondering what you're doing. And he's saying, like, I'm looking for an honest man. Like, I'm trying to, he's like trying to break, it seems like he's trying to break their spell of just like kind of going through the motions and to like think what you're doing, which is sort of related to what we're talking about. Like, kind of step back a little bit, think what you're doing. Yeah, you have needs, and some pleasure is fine, and regular pleasures and things. You don't have to be like a monk in life, but yeah, to start to kind of use your mind in in the highest way possible for your as a human being. And it seems, I know for me, when I've started to do that, I think in life more and more, and have felt more alive coming out of my own deadness that I used to have. And yeah, that seems like one way to kind of address our zombification.
yeah. It's the Hermit card for reference.
Hermit, okay.
Yeah, I'm
Okay.
big. Or maybe there's a few other. There's obviously there's a lot of decks that sort of rename things, but I think the
Mm.
basic understanding is the Hermit. But yeah, he's got the lantern. He's walking with the lantern and sort of the staff, and he's got the hood up, and he's looking. And yeah, I think the Diogenes connection. I think that's true, or at least close enough that
Mm.
I would say it's true.
Mm.
I can't say yay or nay for sure, but it makes sense to me. That like because I think Diogenes had a lamp too. He would walk around during the day with a lit lamp,
Oh, wow.
and and yeah, I the need to like again, like walking around in the zombie parade, being a way of representing some kind of psychological thing. Walking around in the daytime with the lantern, representing like, are you seeing things clearly? You even if it's daytime, you're in darkness. You need to turn your lamp
Yeah.
up. You need to see what is true for you. And I think for me, one of the path that I've sort of been on in that regard, my de-zombification process, is of turning to the body again and again, turning to the
Mm.
body of what's going on in the body, of being able to hold the energies and the instincts and everything else and try and have a relationship to them, figure out what is true. And that, I don't know, for me, that's been a long process. Maybe there are easier ways to go about it, but the sort of shorthand for me is like, how do I know what I want? And how do I know that what I want is what I want in the sense of what my soul needs to become more alive, or
Mm.
whatever this sort of process is that we are alive to do, whatever that is.
Mm.
There's the goal is not to be completely shut off and dead and completely untouched by everything. So there's some sort of a true growth that happens through my system. What is that? How do I find it? How do I differentiate it from the false things that have been implanted in me from
Mm.
advertising or whatever growing up,
Mm.
culturally?
Mm.
How do I find what's true? And I don't know that well, I do know there is no one answer fits all. Everybody has to kind of find their own way to it. But the like you were saying, the sense of life having more meaning, of being, more alive, more colorful, more saturated, metaphorically
Mm.
speaking, like I think and also our ability to live within our own life, to express ourselves, to be present and receptive to what we're getting and active in interacting with it and kind of both at the same time without
Mm.
needing to kind of shut it down or force it to be a certain way.
Yeah.
Kind of letting that spontaneity move through us while also having that lantern, that clarity of thought, and not being, uh, needing to either tamp this down or go unconscious. So kind of finding a
Yeah.
way where we can have the flow and the lantern at the same time would be, to me, to my mind, that would be maybe the resurrection. That would be sort of the coming back to life again. Um, yeah, yeah,
Coming back to life is kind of coming back in touch with what your body, what you really are.
yeah, yeah. Because there's so much in here that, for me, there's so much in here that I've um, been alienated from for so long.
Mm,
So using the zombie metaphor, like my body was just kind of going along, but my mind was
mm,
not at all in the body. So if I can bring the spirit back into the body,
mm,
then I'm no longer a zombie. There's a me here that's present to my life.
mm,
And just one quick example, and then maybe you
mm,
can share something, or we can go on with the thing. But
mm,
um, one of the things that has been a noticeable change for me is, like, when I was in high school, um, I could not dance. I could not move my body well with music. Like, it just didn't work. And
mm,
I felt very frustrated. I felt very locked. I was in my head.
mm,
I couldn't really, feel anything. And starting in 2010, I was introduced to these sort of somatic meditation practices that I've continued off and on since then. It's been one of my pillars that I go back to.
mm,
And like, I can dance now. Like, you can put music on, and I can move around to it, and I feel good. And like I still think there are more wires that need to connect in my nervous system for me to maybe get into the kind of emotional level of dancing, where like
mm,
it's expressive thing or something. Like, for me, it's just sort of like, it's just kind of fun.
mm,
But the integration between the part of me that is listening to and appreciating the music, and the part of me that moves my body, um, those are much more in connection with each other. I didn't take dance classes. I don't know how to dance. I might be interested in that. I don't know.
mm,
But that's an example of something like that ability lived in my body, but the part of my body that my main personality lived in didn't talk to that. They
mm,
were sort of separate. So as I've come into more conscious awareness of the somatic experience of having a body,
mm,
that's become more alive. My body's become more alive, more responsive to the music, less shut down, less I need to keep that away from because I can't deal with what's in there, or it just needs to be quiet. It needs to stop,
mm,
disrupting my pure thought process,
mm,
which I think is something our culture just does. We're kind of alienated from our bodies in general.
mm,
But there's so much in there to be found, both good and bad. There's a lot of repressed emotions and stuff in there, but there's also a lot of skills and talents and things that we're not aware of, that maybe we feel alienated from. We've a lack of meaning. We feel like zombies,
mm,
when really our life is somewhere already existing within us. We don't need to consume something to feel alive. We
mm.
need to stop consuming things and let what's inside of us reanimate us, bring us back in that way. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems like a right picture to me. And that seems like a good measure. Like if you can dance, I believe in sort of primitive, whatever you want to call them, cultures, like dance tends to be much more a part of their lives, I think. And what was I going to say? Oh yeah. What you're generally saying about getting in touch with the body, sort of being part of renewed health or vigor or life. Yeah, to me, that's the opposite of this nightmare picture I have of sort of the idea I got about Descartes' kind of, you know, I think, therefore I am, and the sort of shift in our culture to maybe doubting everything but consciousness, or and consciousness being sort of characterized by sort of narrow propositional logic. A equals B, B equals C, therefore A equals C, sort of narrowing us, narrowing what we value. We don't value the color world around us. It's more and yeah, that sort of maybe feeds into what we were talking about earlier, the instrumental logic of setting up my life in a very specific way, or marketing, trying to maximize based on numbers, everything's abstracted. And yet getting back to the body seems like a way out of that and towards happiness, towards feeling alive.
Yeah, towards that meaning, that meaningful life again. Yeah.
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 Is there another part of the article that you wanted to talk about? You meant, or
Um,
excuse me, the chapter.
yeah. There's a lot of interesting stuff that they sort of promise. This
Mm,
the domicide, like we talked about, they mentioned somewhere the four horsemen of the apocalypse, which is fascinating.
mm,
I've always been curious about that whole Book of Revelations thing.
mm.
Let's see. Um, yeah, I think the sort of the a world that no longer explains itself nor provides instructions on how to live within it. The sort of death of the Christian worldview. We've touched on that, but I mean
Mm.
I just think that there's a lot of people who joke these days, and I do too, around Easter of like, oh, it's Zombie Jesus Day, you know? And I
Oh,
mean,
because he came back because he
because
was
he because
dead and he came
because
back
he's
to
dead and
life.
he comes
Oh,
back,
okay.
and so like he's a zombie. But I think there's some there's some truth to that, in that it speaks to the desacralization of our world, that
Mm,
we cannot imagine anything in there other than, well, he was alive and he died and now his body's back, so he must be a zombie. That's the only way our rational objective worldview allows that to happen.
mm,
And tracing back to Descartes and all that,
mm,
Descartes. It also made me think of um, H.P. Lovecraft's work, his sort of weird cosmic tales, particularly Cthulhu.
mm,
Cthulhu is described as the dead that cannot die, or something like that. Like where even the like time goes, when you exist through time for so long, even death dies, or something like that. There's a classic phrasing that I'm failing to capture,
mm,
but Cthulhu is sort of depicted as this monstrous deity that is sleeping somewhere under the water and will awaken and arise one day.
mm,
And I just the it's like the dark version of the Christ myth, of like the return of Christ. Like
mm,
Christ has died, Christ is dead. Christ will come again. I forget what the hymn how the hymn goes, but there's a well-known one.
mm,
Um, but Cthulhu has died, but has not died, and will return, and we will all be subject to his judgment and his destruction,
mm,
as sort of a Christianity without faith, like without any meaning or any heart to it. It's just some form over there that is dark and mysterious and is going to come back and
mm,
probably destroy us all.
mm,
Um, being being akin to the zombie, the sort of the dead that do not die, the
mm,
living death, the state we all find ourselves in.
mm.
Um, so I don't know if there's much else to that, but that was one of the pieces that stuck out to me. Um,
You mentioned the zombie Jesus. Like, I am interested in this sort of uh cultural, um I don't know if it's reanimation, but things that naturally people talk about, gossip, superstition. I sort of think those are like sort of primitive or spontaneous sort of energy that maybe can, I mean, you can talk about it as like people are searching in some way. Like, certainly it speaks to desacralization of the Jesus myth, and maybe some enthusiasm about zombie in some way. And yes, also that we can only think of like death and rebirth as a zombie kind of thing, as a horror kind of thing, but people are like joking about it. I just think, yeah, I'm interested in folklore, and not just that word meaning what was collected, but more like what is coming up now or what is being shared now.
hmm.
And you know, I know it's a lot less than it used to be because we have mass media and everything and social media now. So, and people don't talk to each other as much and don't gather as much and all that stuff. But I'm still interested in all that stuff, learning about it and uh kind of I think there's maybe seeds of rebirth for the culture in that stuff. Like it would almost be interesting to think how we go from zombie Jesus to a new understanding of Jesus as a sacred thing, or I don't know. It comes about and it's a complex thing and I don't know much about it, but I'm interested in that kind of thing. I mean, one thing that happens is that artists, we were talking a little bit about this before recording.
Mhm.
Artists can, I mean, I don't think we said it this way, but it's like artists I think of artists as people who absorb they have some there's something like the shaman and they like look around them and they notice things in different ways or they notice different things and they're absorbing them and then it gets processed and then it comes out into some form if they're like a decent artist and they they put it into some form that then other people watch or listen to and that helps them to under it changes their attention or understanding in some way of that world from which the artist absorbed things.
Mhm.
And I'm I'm just sort of thinking of just that kind of stuff. How because one thing we're talking about with how to respond to the zombie is on a personal level. Another is like on a cultural level. And I'm sort of I don't know what you think about what kind of things might be brewing. I alluded to maybe destructive forces in our society now and anger and everything. But I'm wondering also like what kinds of things, superstition, gossip, that can beliefs that are a sign or a part of a reanimation, a part of a
Yeah.
renewal.
Whew, yeah, there's a lot there. I mean, I think the connection between artists and shamans that you sort of sketched out there makes a lot of sense to me. I think the way I think of it is like whatever label you want to put on it, there are people who are able to. This is something else we touched on. Like there are things that kind of float around in the culture,
Mm,
whether they're generated by people or they're forms of the culture itself or something divine, who knows? But there's some level there where like there's a sense of new meaning that is available to be tuned into. And
mm,
then a good artist will have their senses open to that new meaning
mm,
and also be looking around them for things to represent, to sort of
mm,
embody that new meaning into.
mm,
And that can look like a particular story, or that can look like a painting, or just
mm,
a lecture, like whatever. It can take many, many forms, but
mm,
the idea is to bring this sense of meaning and to present it in a form that people recognize.
mm,
It could also be the zombie parade could be a good example. It's a
mm,
form that people recognize. It's
mm,
it's sort of um, so I think that's kind of true, and I think that's how um cultural, at least cultural evolution happens, is these
mm,
these new ideas get presented through the artist type or the shaman or whatever, and the culture, if they recognize the new form, the new meaning properly, and they respond to it, there's like a rebirth or a growth process,
mm.
if that's what needs to happen. Maybe a death process needs to happen beforehand. It's never,
Mm,
I don't want to buy into the myth that it's always just better and better and more and more.
mhm,
But I think where the destruction comes in is if that energy is there and it's needed, but it's not seen or it's not recognized well, it's not
mhm,
integrated, then it becomes a destructive force against the culture that is barricading itself against the new meaning,
mhm,
which brings us back to our whole Dionysus podcast from a few months ago,
mhm,
the rejection of the new god, the rejection of the new energy, bringing about some form of making the new energy become destructive because you're overly identified with the old form.
mhm,
But that's what literally is played out in the world. If the new energy cannot come in, then destruction does occur. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
not just a metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then I think the question becomes like, how do you do that? And I think one of the dangers is, how do I put this? Like our particular culture, this consumer culture that we're critiquing as sort of the zombie creating culture, um, will commodify things very quickly. So it turns it to its own use very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And what do we do about that? I don't know, but I think we have to be careful because there's been enough examples of things that were presented as a solution that ended up being turned around and just used to further the zombie culture, the commodification, the consumer culture.
Mm-hmm.
Um, mm, I don't know. One of the big examples I think that is pretty black and white, like Rage Against the Machine. Like
Mm-hmm.
those guys were clearly like literally titled Rage Against the Machine. They're trying to make some sort of impact, and I'm sure there is a level at which they have brought attention and awareness to a lot of people in the culture, but the culture is still the machine they were raging against is still very much a machine, and it's selling their CDs, it's selling their t-shirts. People wear it and they feel good about themselves. And that's not to say that that's a bad thing that people are feeling good about themselves and they like the band and all of that, but the band had a very strong message. I think there's one song where they scream "Wake up" over and over again, and like that got turned into another thing to buy and collect, rather than respond. So how do we where do we find that actual spring of newness, and how do we invoke it in the culture? How do we embody it in our own lives? How do we make something that isn't more zombie culture? I don't know. Um, I think it's an important question, and one that's really needed at this point in history to be at least sought out. We need to go on our quest into the wasteland and figure out what the fuck is going on here.
Mm. Yeah, it's always hard to know what I mean, you can't ever really know what the effects of your actions will be. It seems like you just, try to develop your wisdom as much as you can and sort of have some conservatism about being careful about putting too much out there, kind of having some awareness that it will morph, other people will interpret it in weird ways and things. And
Mhm.
then yeah, there's something about maybe besides content, the form of the art that maybe can kind of help some piece of art to preserve without sort of being misinterpreted and morphed and stuff too much, maybe.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
there's some kind of with form you can kind of you guide people's interpretation a little bit of I mean with form of a movie or a book or whatever you can guide people's sort of understanding and sort of limit their uh using the monkey mind to kind of twist things around or to dismiss or something like that, I don't know, which I sort of think of like TikTok videos and maybe AI entertainment being like bad for that, as opposed to longer form art that you have to kind of have patiently absorb, and it sort of forces you maybe to develop some depth of understanding before you can react to it. I think that's something about our culture is it's this action reaction kind of thing, and that I think that leads you away from depth. Oh.
Hmm. 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 Yeah, yeah, it's complicated, right? Because like um the thing you're talking about as far as form and structure and things, I think back to our preceding conversation about Fight Club, and like Chuck Palahniuk had an idea that he was trying to convey, and it got twisted. It got twisted by the culture and the monkey mind, and did not have the impact that he, I assume, was hoping to have on the culture. Um, and I think it is dangerous to assume you can control such things, because oftentimes that gets you in trouble. But if you can't control it, then how do you know you're going to have a good effect? I don't know. I don't know.
But I mean,
Hmm.
he wrote the book, so it's still out there for someone to pick up. And I mean, you're talking about a general sort of sense of interpretation, but maybe people later on they sort of like revisited the book and they're like when they're 20 years later, or other
Yeah.
people that we maybe have a bias towards. I forgot what it's called, but what we hear, and there's maybe other interpretations. But anyway, he put the book out there and it's still there as a book, uh, for people to read the whole thing and they can digest the whole thing instead of just taking one part. And maybe they can learn to be better readers and things like that.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Phew. You were saying something else at the end of your last thing, and I had wanted to respond, and now I can't remember what it was.
Oh,
Um, yeah, shucks.
was it
Um,
anything about just the artist trying to put something out in a certain form to try to they have like a message or a teaching or a lesson or something, and
yeah,
it's
yeah, I think, I mean, then I think that just loops back onto the Chuck Palahniuk stuff, perhaps. But
mm,
I don't know, I think of that in regards to Jesus, to go back to
mm,
that, and that like he brought a certain teaching that I'm sure did not include colonizing and enslaving half the world and forcing them to convert and taking their children and killing them if they didn't. And like I don't think he says that anyway. He does
yeah.
not say that anywhere in the Bible. And so whatever it was that he brought, like over time it got twisted, and if Jesus Christ cannot bring an idea that doesn't get twisted eventually, what hope do we have?
I mean, you're looking at the bad parts, but I
Well,
mean,
that's true.
people were also doing that before he came along. I mean, and the teachings are still there, for people. Like you can do all this, you can make war and do violence, and then you could go back to the text and it's like turn the other cheek when someone smites you on one cheek, or it's like hard to reconcile that, and then so maybe, that they'll be, you can always go back to that, and there will be people who will be like, wait a second, this wasn't right. Like
Mm,
enslaving is not along his message, so
mhm.
I sort of think there's always that hope. I mean, we have, this may a little like with the Fight Club, we have many primate kind of tendencies and acquisitive kinds of things, but you know when you have his teachings or Buddha's teachings or others, I mean, there's always that like, you know, I think it can bring you back to goodness eventually. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
it's
it's
out
almost
there.
like I hear you painting a picture of, I hear you painting. I'm mixing my metaphors. What I hear you doing is like, it's the same thing I was saying earlier about like how I was able to find my ability to dance in my body. Like it was
Mm,
there. I just wasn't able to access it. And the same thing with be it Fight Club or the teachings of Christ, like the cultural, the things that are hiding under the
mm.
common cultural level, they're still there. We just have to have our lantern up bright enough to see what's down there, and
Yeah.
resurrect that as well as whatever's in ourself.
Yeah.
It's maybe something about the nature of reality that things work that way, or at least our experience of reality as humans.
It could be part of this whole roiling drama. I mean, but we kind of we have the myths to kind of bring us back to something better. And yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
was there anything else in the book? I feel like we did a pretty good job of it.
Yeah, I thought we did good. I mean, I still find it's just kind of a fun thing that zombies, unlike, well, I mean, aliens or extraterrestrials, I mean, or vampires. It's interesting the monsters that people create. I believe etymologically, monster it means warning, which is kind of fun.
Oh, wow.
Uh, but but yeah, I just think it's funny that zombies are an inarticulate form, and it's almost like, maybe we should articulate what they're trying to say to us. So,
Oh, nice.
and that's kind
Yeah,
of just the end of the chapter, but
speak for the zombie. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, that was the one piece I wanted to come back to too, was the end of the chapter where it says he says or they say uh the main function of the zombie symbol seems to express the meaning crisis but not treat or explain it.
mm,
And so I remember, I'm remembering, I don't know where it is, but I'm remembering something of it being like, or maybe it was just my own thought of it being like, oh, it's half a myth. Like it's presenting an issue, but it's not presenting the solution to the issue. So if we were going to, this may be a good way to wrap up the podcast too. If we were going to finish the zombie myth and try and like articulate what what the answer is, like one of the things you just one thing would be what you just said is like, what is a zombie trying to say?
mm,
Can we understand it enough to speak for it on its behalf?
mm,
Um, and in that case, like already we're turning it from an object to a subject. We're moving it
mm.
closer to a subject. I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah.
we'll continue doing that on the next podcast where we talk about the zombie myth.
Yeah, I think I'm down to do however many chapters are left in this book, one at a time. I haven't read the rest of them. Hopefully, they're not too long. I think it's a fairly short book. But
Yeah.
yeah, I'd be down to do that. We could sort of make a little mini series.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool.
Okay. Well, it's good talking to you today.
Likewise. Likewise. Till next time.